Chapter 314. After meeting the unpredictable witch and obtaining the important ability to face Pulis directly instead of being instantly killed, Luoya woke up from his dream again. He rubbed his eyes and looked at Lillian, who was still sleeping soundly. Before he was fully awake, he heard a soft knock on the door. The young man was slightly taken aback. He slowly let go of Lillian's hand and came to the door. After opening the door, he saw a familiar young man standing outside. Brother Antonio? Luoya was a little surprised to see Antonio knocking on the door. The young man didn't have any objection to Luoya's intimate address. He nodded at Luoya, who was still quite energetic. He didn't expect the young man who was seriously injured and dying last night to recover so well. It had been more than 3 hours since he entered the dream. Not only did he not look tired, but he also looked refreshed, as if he had drunk some medicine. Is it over? Yes, it's over. Well, let's go. Let's discuss the battle plan, Antonio said, and led Luoya back to the hall where Estrid was. At this time, the Queen of Dreams was floating in the air under the colorful glass of the hall, just like before when she talked to Luoya. Her eyes were closed, and there was a sacred and dreamy beauty to her. Ancestor, this is the center of the dream enchantment. Lady Estrid has returned to the dream to rest. This body is a fake body, but it is still very valuable, so it is necessary to guard and maintain it. Antonio explained and looked at the figure above with eyes full of tenderness. Luoya's heart skipped a beat. He thought for a moment and asked tentatively, Brother Antonio, you seem to have a good relationship with Ancestor. Have you known each other for a long time? Yes. Although I'm a soldier now, I'm actually a graduate of St. Freya Academy. Lady Estrid is my mentor, and also the person who recommended me to the Twilight Sage Association. We've known each other for more than 10 years. I see. Then, as a graduate of St. Freya Academy, you stayed in Leinster to protect and assist the scholar, which is Lady Estrid's job. So that's how it is. Is that why it's called a guardian? But looking at you, Dean, why do I feel that something isn't right? The black-haired youth looked at Antonio's affectionate eyes and had some vague guesses in his heart. If he remembered correctly, Antonio had never married in his life. In the history without the interference of Luoya and the others, Antonio had personally experienced this incident 400 years ago and successfully survived. But Estrella had disappeared since then. Not long after, the Twilight Sage would fall apart, and no trace of her could be found in Roy's era. But in that case, why didn't Antonio tell him anything when he was investigating the scholar? Is it for some special reason, or is it because he doesn't even trust Roy after the collapse of the Sage Society? Luoya was puzzled, but he didn't expect to get the answer soon. Although it's not right to say this, it's really good that you can come this time. It may not seem like much to you, but Lady Estrid is very happy to see you. Hearing Antonio's words, Luoya widened his eyes slightly. The young man smiled. In fact, before you came, I had some prejudice against your family. After all, you haven't sent anyone to visit Teacher in the past few hundred years. But now, it seems that you have your own difficulties. Looking at the two people being chased by the Curse King, Antonio said and sighed. Luoya was slightly taken aback. He recalled the happy look of the Rainbow Ancestor when she looked at him and suddenly felt heavy in his heart. Even with the Dream Demon bloodline, Estrid's thoughts were still human, and it was obvious that she valued her family and kinship very much. Letting her guard the Dream of Chaos alone, not seeing her family for hundreds of years, and even directly forgetting her existence, this kind of behavior couldn't be described as excessive. It was no wonder that Antonio was indignant about it. But, as the saying goes, there are gains and losses. The main reason why Estrid was able to hide until now was that she had cut off contact with the Akate family. In fact, when the eyes of the dark were focused on the Akate family, Estrid was the safest. I've heard about your plan, but unfortunately, Lady Estrid doesn't want to sacrifice you like this, so we will still fight Pulis next. Although you were defeated last night, your efforts weren't in vain. The current Pulis is probably the weakest he has ever been. Antonio said and patted the young man's shoulder encouragingly. Luoya smiled. According to Estrid's speculation, The Cursed King should have fallen because his strength had been declining due to his age in the past few decades. Although Luoya and Lillian were defeated last night, they did indeed force Pulis to fight with all his might. Powerful strength comes with a corresponding price. This was the law of this world, and even the powerful Cursed King couldn't ignore it. Besides, the battle last night wasn't just the first battle between Luoya and Lillian. There was also the second battle where Estrid showed up. In the morning, the ancestor was exhausted, so Pulis' condition would only be worse after fighting multiple battles. Chapter 3:15. When the sun set, Leinster City, which had been reduced to ruins within a day, also ushered in its own dusk, as if heralding the end of the city. After the initial exodus of residents and the continuous battles and massacres, the entire city, except for the inner city, had turned into a ghost town. The Saint Heroes Society was exterminated as expected by the higher-ups, and the Brotherhood of Redemption had also suffered a great loss. The chaotic streets were littered with corpses, and the stench of blood and decay filled the nostrils, making people nauseous. Occasionally, there would be some survivors who had survived the turmoil, but even these determined and courageous people could not hold on any longer. Under the setting sun, they were either in despair or had gone mad. As the night breeze blew, a layer of eerie blood scent floated out of the city. The darkness that wriggled in the remaining buildings began to release innumerable kin. The black-armored soldiers were prepared to begin today's pilgrimage under the leadership of the clergy. This was a city that had already fallen into despair, but it was also a city that still had some hope. On top of the walls of the inner city, countless warriors and students looked at the swaying darkness in the shadows with pale faces. However, even if their bodies were trembling, they did not flee. That was because in the academy behind them, a small number of teachers were organizing refugees under the lead of the elves into the misty forest to seek refuge. Many of the residents who ran into the forest were their relatives. Pregnant women and children who were still ignorant of the world were all behind them. When the waves of destruction swept over, as the elite warriors of this era, compared to running away in panic, they wanted to leave behind a blurry back view that they were holding on to something for the future generations rather than running away in panic. Protection and sacrifice, despair and hope, this was the theme of this era. When this theme played in their ears, the warriors might still not be able to face death with equanimity, but even if they were trembling with fear, they would never lack the courage to look it in the eye. Because there were too many things that needed to be defended with their lives. Under the dusk, Antonio looked at the palace where Estrella was. Various emotions flashed across his eyes. The feelings that had existed since he was a teenager surged in his heart after many years of precipitation, and finally turned into a fearless chuckle. Pulis was still wearing his black robe. His skinny body seemed to be hidden in the darkness. But compared to yesterday, the Cursed King, who was walking among the monsters, didn't look good today. The strange green light illuminated half of his face. His green pupils were hidden in his eye sockets. His expression was no longer as gentle as it used to be. Only coldness remained. Looking at Pulis now, even the most ignorant people had already known his choice. And the old man did not care about it. After all, for him, everyone in the city would turn into unspeakable corpses in the future. It did not matter if he knew the truth in advance. The pale green light flickered in the wind. Following the light was a hazy mist. As the burning light flickered, more and more figures emerged from the mist. It was as if the black-armored soldiers from the other side had walked out of the mist silently. Sensing the presence of the oil lamp, the scattered soldiers and clergy in the city seemed to have found the direction and began to gather. Looking down from the city wall, there was already a wriggling darkness around Pulis. Faint whispers came with the wind, and the warriors on the city wall frowned. Amidst the blasphemous chanting, the old man in the black robe gently raised the oil lamp and beat the war drum. There were no flags fluttering, no horns sounding. The dark sea rushed towards the inner city under the guidance of the light. Hundreds and thousands of warriors on the city wall responded. Ready, fire! Amidst the shouts, under the last rays of the sunset, the defenders drew their bows and knocked their arrows in unison. A cloud-like rain of arrows enveloped the enemy. There was almost no suspense in the outcome. Amidst the rain of arrows, a large number of monsters fell like wheat being cut down. The arrows shot by the extraordinaires easily penetrated the armor of the black armored soldiers and pierced through their hearts. With the remaining force, they fell to the ground and kicked up a cloud of dust. The defense of the black clergy was even weaker. Their heads directly exploded under the attack of the small missiles like arrows. Blood and flesh splattered everywhere. The first round of attacks by the defenders had achieved significant results. That was no doubt inspiring. At the same time, it also exposed the biggest weakness of the monsters, which was the lack of long-range attacks. Other than the black-robed clergy who could shoot out chaos curses, most of the ordinary black-armored soldiers did not have any long-range attacks. Having fallen into madness and lost their intelligence, they naturally did not have any tactics to speak of. The defenders returned fire with their bows and arrows. The students of the academy cast long-range curses together. Amidst the fluctuation of the curses, the sky seemed to be boiling. Rolling magma fell from the sky, and the rain of fire sprayed over the vast area outside the barrier. Any monster that came into contact with the fire would be turned into a blazing ball of fire. However, even with such a large scale of damage, it was still a little powerless in the face of the endless number of soldiers. Thousands of black-armored soldiers fell under the arrows. The tenacious individuals struggled in the blazing fire. However, the monsters behind them continued to surge forward calmly. As time passed, the inventory of arrows was constantly depleted. The faces of the students who cast the curses also turned pale. The heavy breathing on the city wall was getting louder and louder. However, the disgusting murmurs were getting closer and louder. However, in the face of such an unfavorable situation, the exhausted warriors did not despair. Instead, they looked at their commander in anticipation. Under everyone's gaze, Antonio's body did not move at all. It was only when the blasphemous whispers began to become unbearable that the young man calmly gave his order. The structure of the monster's armor was clearly visible to the eyes. Activate cross-blade light. Cover the area vertically. Fire the flare. Flare. Amidst the shouts of the soldiers, the curse-powered flare on the city wall rose into the sky one after another. For a moment, the city of Leinster was as bright as day. Along with the order to activate, the sound of the defense machinery operating rumbled. The magic elements inside the colorful stones that looked like decorations began to rapidly activate. Under the stimulation of the curses, the colorful killing lights flickered in the stones and gradually turned into a shining cross. Fire. Amidst the shouting of the order, hundreds of cross lights erupted at the same time. The vibration of the volley forced the soldiers on the city wall to support each other. The light of destruction began to spread out from the bottom of the city wall. The torrent of magic elements plowed the ground like a knife and quickly spread out into the distance. The dazzling torrent then rushed into the Black Sea. Countless monsters were cut in half before they could even react. The foul smell of blood continued to explode and spread, and the vast battlefield was filled with crimson marks that looked like the claw marks of a giant beast. Under the power of the fortress curse vessel Crossblade Aura, the outside of St. Freya Academy was almost raised by a layer. The scene of corpses everywhere was probably unsightly in normal times, but now it was a blessing for all human warriors. After a long time of forbearance, the warriors who used the curse vessel to inflict a lot of damage to the enemy raised their swords and cheered. The students also showed excited smiles, but Antonio's cheeks looked grim under the light of the fire. From the beginning of the battle, he knew that the outcome of this war did not depend on these black monsters. The young man's gaze was not only on the battlefield, but also on the old man holding an oil lamp in the distance. The battlefield now seemed fierce, but before Priest made his move, it was no different from before the battle began. Chapter 3:16. In the war, the people's will of unity was naturally commendable. Their determination to risk their lives was equally moving, but everyone had to admit one thing. Some objective existences were difficult to contend with or change by people's subjective will, such as the gap in strength. Boom! Violent thunder exploded in Leinster City for the umpteenth time. The torrent of cursed power continued to wash forward like water, as if it would never end. The old man with the lantern stood still, but the soldiers and students on the city wall had to retreat in a panic. Antonio, who was at the front of the crowd, looked exhausted. Sensing that the intensity of the white thunderbolts had not changed at all, as if there was no end to them, the young man understood the black-robed old man's intention. Priest was conserving his strength. Facing Antonio, he did not burst out like last night. Instead, he had been maintaining the level of a full-force attack of source rank level 2, constantly attacking. But even so, Antonio was overwhelmed after a long confrontation. After everyone on the city wall evacuated, the solidified space shield finally dissipated. The moment Antonio left, the explosive thunder destroyed the towering high wall, and the collapsed tower rushed into the city with the turbulence. The people's resistance did not stop the steps of the Lord of Curses after all. In the chaotic whispers, the Redemption Legion gathered here began to march toward the broken city gate. They crossed the gap in the city wall to pursue the retreating soldiers and students. Bursts of strange voices came, but the crazy murmurs were offset by the special effect of the dream enchantment. In Estrid's enchantment, people barely gained the ability to resist the murmurs, but even so, they could only fight in close combat for a short time. The retreating soldiers retreated to the second city wall and organized resistance again, but the effect was very limited. Without the strong fortifications and the powerful curse vessel system, the defenders were no longer able to resist the black-armored soldiers that swarmed in. The city walls fell one after another. At midnight, the monsters from hell finally broke through the last barrier and rushed into the college. Behind the innumerable monsters, Priest returned to the academy that was nominally under his charge with an oil lamp in hand. There was a smile on his aged face, and his pace was steady, neither fast nor slow, just like a returning king or a general returning victorious. The moment Priest entered the dream enchantment, a familiar feeling suddenly surged in his heart. But before he could think about it, a violent fluctuation of cursed power came from the sky. In the hall where Estrid was, colorful rainbows soared into the sky. Countless dream elves glowed. The colorful aurora lit up the sky and then shone toward the intruders. The old man under the aurora remained unmoved. He cut open his finger and used his bloodline ability. The miracle tree and the grassland glowing appeared again. The Lord of Curses, who was also protected by the elves, was unscathed by Estrid's killer move. Boring trick. Priest looked at the end of the aurora in the distance and curled up the corner of his mouth. The more Estrid prepared, the more it meant that she was unable to break free from the dream. Although the combined attack of the elves was powerful, it was far from being able to hurt him. The 100-year wait was finally coming to an end. The Lord of Curses stepped forward again. The ghostly green lamp was surrounded by white fog. The old man who walked out of the fog was like the Grim Reaper, bringing destruction to everyone with him. But the moment he stepped into the nighttime college that was only left with a few lights, Priest's movement paused. A feeling of stagnation and pressure on the heart suddenly appeared in the old man's body. It was the instinctive sense of danger of the Lord of Curses who had experienced countless battles over the years. Its appearance could only mean one thing, and that was the arrival of a crisis. Priest's pupils shrunk in an instant. The next moment, the old man, who seemed to have sensed something, turned his head abruptly. His eyes, which had seen the vicissitudes of life, pierced through the obstacles like an eagle and landed on the top of the clock tower in the moonlit night. It was a figure with an illusory beauty, like an elf that no longer existed in this world. The figure was wearing a dark coat, and his body was slightly thin. His skin was slightly pale due to blood loss, and his shoulder-length hair was fluttering in the night wind. His cold and majestic gaze looked down. The moonlight attached to his body, dyeing it with brilliance like a guardian. The moment he saw the familiar yet strange figure, Priest's eyes widened abruptly. The Lord of Curses naturally would not lose his composure because of the change in his enemy's appearance. What really made him feel strange was Luo Yu's eyes. It was a pair of eyes that was calm and vicissitudes, as if it had experienced countless years and seen the prosperity and decline of the world. The bright color in the golden eyes seemed to have been erased by time, leaving only the dim color of dusk. The moment Priest looked into Luo Ya's eyes, he even had the illusion that he was looking directly at an ancient existence. Something was not right. Almost instinctively, Priest's curses began to churn in his body. Luo Ya, who was staring at him, did not move or have any killing intent, but it was precisely because of that made Priest's hair stand on end. "What did you do?" The old man furrowed his brows and questioned. However, he did not expect an answer at all. Vigilant in his heart, Priester simply raised his hand. The radiance of spells shone like stars that fell to the ground in the dark night. The intense radiance rushed towards the figure on top of the tower along with his words. Everything before him turned into white light, just like last night. The familiar scene made the black-haired young man's eyes flicker slightly. But now, he was no longer the same as before. The moment before the radiance reached him, a dusk-colored airflow suddenly burst out of the youth's body. The turbid airflow instantly covered heaven and earth, spreading in all directions. The dusk-colored hurricane firmly withstood Priest's attack, and then turned it into nothingness as if wiping away dust. However, that was not the end. As the night wind blew, the sound of the wind was heard. Almost in an instant, the entire St. Freya Academy seemed to have fallen into another world. It was a dusk-colored airflow that filled the surroundings as if it was the end of the world. The ear-piercing sound of the wind mixed with the sound of rolling sand echoed in the air. The call of death filled the surroundings as if it was right beside one's ears. The old man in the black robe looked at the scene in front of him and frowned in surprise. However, he did not unleash his curses like he did when he faced the freezing air of the frozen earth. Because unlike the freezing air before, the dusk-colored airflow did not attack in a straight line but was everywhere. "I see. I didn't expect you to have obtained a new power." The old man in the black robe's face gradually turned gloomy in the sandstorm. Thick curses began to accumulate in his body. In just a short day, Luo Ya had undergone such a huge change. This situation surprised him, and at the same time, it also aroused the murderous intent in Priest's heart. As expected, this family member must be dealt with, or else there would be endless trouble in the future. Fortunately, everything was not too late. Even if he had fallen and lost his glory, Priest's power as the king of the human race still hadn't changed at all. They were the wealth that the old man had accumulated over countless years, the experience he had accumulated through countless life and death battles. These were things that others couldn't take away no matter what method they used. No matter how similar it is, this isn't the monster's real body. Although I don't know how you managed to block my attack with this turbid wind, it's meaningless if you can't hurt me. The black-robed old man looked at Luo Ya and shook his head, as if he had already seen the outcome of this battle of attrition. However, the youth with long black hair fluttering in the wind didn't seem to care. Unable to cause any damage, was that really the case? "Haven't you noticed, Priestly?" "What? My wind didn't block your attack. It faded away because it should have faded away." The black-haired youth calmly told the truth. The king of curses furrowed his brows visibly as if he had caught onto some important information. Luo Ya didn't mind the old man's reaction. He extended his hand, and a swirling airflow condensed in his palm. Gazing at the airflow that carried the howling of the wind, the black-haired youth spoke calmly. "Priestly, you said that I'm arrogant, but aren't you the same? Since ancient times, how many civilizations have collapsed in front of the wind summoners? Countless mythical creatures with supernatural powers far superior to humans couldn't escape their misfortune. You are indeed powerful, but why do you think you're an exception?" The continuous questioning echoed in the old man's ears. But before Priestly could speak, an unprecedented weakness suddenly appeared in his body. Clang! As the lantern fell to the ground, the king of curses widened his eyes due to his blurred vision. He looked at his arm in disbelief and realized that his well-maintained arms were now covered in wrinkles and withered like tree bark. In front of the wind summoners, everything is equal because what they blow away is time. The black-haired youth calmly revealed the answer. On the opposite side, The old man's expression changed drastically. He finally understood why the curses couldn't reach Luoya. Under the erosion of time, even a powerful attack that could destroy the 10 cities would vanish due to the overflow of magic elements. This was an unchangeable law. Priestley, you've lost. You've lost to our race. Looking down at the old man who was rapidly weakening on the ground, Luoya calmly said those words without any doubt. However, those words of victory froze the king of curses' body and aroused his endless rage. I've lost? Heh, heh heh. You're the first one who dares to say that in front of me. I see. So this is the 6 calamities? It's indeed an almost unstoppable power. But I've said it before. Any level 3 source rank skill is not unbreakable in front of me. Chapter 318. In the shattered sky, a blinding rainbow light erupted. Pulis swung his staff to block it, but it was too late. The moment the white radiance collided with the aurora, a massive shockwave swept across the ground. The king of curses, who was already old and weak, and after experiencing the aging of the twilight wind, blood trickled down from the corner of his mouth for the first time. But even so, he still managed to stand firm on his feet. The black-robed old man lifted his head and looked at the shattered sky and the black-haired young man. He finally understood why he felt a strange presence when he stepped into the enchantment. But after a moment, the old man shook his head at Luoya. I see. You're using the aging wind to force me to break the enchantment? Hee, it's indeed a perfect plan. I have no other choice. But kid, do you think you've succeeded? Plea's sighs, which had regained their brilliance, stared at the dream rift that was gradually recovering. His laughter was mixed with anger as he hissed. No, she can't return from the dream at this level. I'm afraid that strike just now is her limit. But it's useless. She can't kill me. The king of curses roared as he tapped his staff on the ground. Instantly, 3 shadows appeared beside his feet. Then, his body glowed once again, dispersing the twilight wind that surrounded him. This is an ancient curse passed down from the ancient Shadow Kingdom. Other than the ability of the Wind Summoner, there is no other way to kill me without triggering it. I still have 3 chances, and I'm afraid your price is about to come. That's true. The black-haired young man, whose spell power was almost exhausted in the fierce battle, nodded. But there wasn't any despair on his face that the old man wanted to see. Luoya gazed at Pulis and repeated his words with a smile. There's still one more person in our race. The moment Luoya's voice fell, the black-haired young lady suddenly appeared beside the young man. Lillian, who rushed over from afar, gazed at the old man before her and extended her hand to the young man. Their interlocked hands acted as a bridge. In just a few moments, an intense resonance appeared between them. At the same time, a drop of blood wrapped in a rainbow radiance appeared before Lillian. The young lady opened her mouth and swallowed it without hesitation. That was the ancestor's blood that Estrid sent through the dream under the path opened by a terrifying enemy. It was also the blood of the nightmare, the most difficult creature to influence in this world. Using it as a medium, a miracle that only lasted for one night was born. Translucent wings extended from her back, and her small ears became slightly sharp. Her already beautiful face exuded a dreamlike charm as her aura changed. Under the colorful light and with her blood as the medium, Lillian temporarily transformed into a dream demon. At the same time, the skill that the witch bestowed upon her also arrived. Altatia's Call. When the light of the skill came into contact with Lillian, the black and red runes of the curse spread out like lightning. After thousands of years, the wielder of the crown finally arrived and sent an invitation letter to the witch's palace. It's time for you to take the stage, Your Majesty. Under the rolling dark clouds that covered the sky, the young man with glittering golden eyes invited Lillian softly. In the next moment, a black mist of curse power quickly enveloped Lillian. When it spread out again, the black-haired princess had transformed into the white-haired queen of the witches. After countless years, Altatia returned to the world. She showed a moving smile to the young man who was holding her hand. Lord Hero, you're really cunning. You're holding my hand so tightly. I can't bear to do it even if I don't want to." Amidst a pleasant chuckle, the white-haired witch floating in the air had a flash in her scarlet eyes. In the next moment, the world froze and began to roll back. Under Priest's eruption, the shattered ground began to restore to its original state. The collapsed buildings were rebuilt. The wind, sand, and dust completely vanished. At this moment, the world was like Altatia's toy. When she landed on the ground, everything that greeted her had to be solemn and gorgeous. Witnessing this incomprehensible miracle, the black-robed old man widened his eyes in disbelief. The moment Altatia appeared, Priest experienced a feeling again after hundreds of years. Fear. Witches. That was a race born from Shiya's shadow in the legends. They were extremely dangerous and incomprehensible. Their existence was a punisher feared by all things in the world. They were also the most difficult ancient existence to come into contact with and understand. The sacred divine tree. Sensing the unimaginable danger, Priest immediately understood the current situation. The pressuring death omen made him decisively choose to strike first. As he shouted, blood gushed out of the old man's orifices. He paid a huge price to turn it into power as he fully activated the absolute defense brought by his bloodline. The sacred giant tree was uprooted from the ground in an instant. The glowing elves resonated together. An altar rose where Priest was. The shadows of the gods that had been resting in the sacred tree since ancient times awakened one by one to provide him with protection. Under the divine light, the old king of curses pointed his staff forward. Under the pressure of fear, he launched the craziest attack he had ever launched in his life. With boiling blood as the foundation, white bones as the embellishment, and the branch of the holy tree as the blade, the king's sword that can kill gods was born. Looking at the brilliant and flawless holy sword under the divine light, the withered old man who had lost an arm had an excited flush on his face. This was a miracle that Priest surpassed himself in a moment of crisis. He used the body of the king of the human race as a medium and combined it with the sacred divine tree. When it was completed, the shadows of the 12 ancient gods on the altar blessed him, and the sacred sword shone with endless brilliance. He could win. Chapter 319. Under the night sky, thick smoke billowed out of the burnt paradise. The grasslands and divine trees were ablaze. The elves were fleeing in all directions, and the shadows of the gods were dissipating in the steaming heat. The black-robed old man's body could no longer be seen, and only sporadic screams could be heard echoing in the night sky. The towering divine tree had turned into a gigantic torch, its flame illuminating the land and sky. The retreating soldiers and students in the distance stared blankly at the burning miracle, while the monsters in the city also wandered away in fear of the presence of the divine flame. Looking at the first flames of karmic retribution, the black-haired young man was speechless. He knew that everything was over. The powerful human king who had committed numerous crimes had disappeared in the flames of the fallen gods. Even if there was an ancient spell that could resurrect him, it was useless. Under the flames that would never be extinguished until they were burned, resurrection would only prolong the pain. It was the grave of a fallen king, and also the end of an era. Priest's ending was lamentable, but what made Luoya ponder the most was the moment when he faced the immense pressure of Altatia and went beyond the limits of self-forging the divine sword. At that time, Priest who had triggered the ancient gods on the altar temporarily regained his youth, which meant that his bloodline ability seemed to have a greater possibility other than allowing him to live longer. It was not impossible for a withered tree to be rejuvenated, but he who cherished his life and feared death probably did not face death again after reaching Source Tier 1. Priest who enjoyed peace, hated aging to the point that he did not hesitate to fall and betray the entire human race, probably did not expect that the thing he gave up everything to pursue was actually in his body. It was just that without the struggle under extreme pressure, he did not have the final possibility to unlock his bloodline. If Priest had been on the front lines and sacrificed himself for the sake of the survival of humanity, he would probably have become another hero's story now. However, the wise old man did not learn some simple things. Responsibility and obligation, dedication and sacrifice. These were words that had no fate with Priest, and also destined his ending. The black-haired young man sighed inwardly as he stared at the flames of karmic retribution. However, the white-haired witch beside him was frowning unhappily. For Altacia, who had not returned to the world for a long time, her opponent had died a little too quickly. If you weren't in such a hurry to attack me, you could have played a little longer. Most of the disobedient are really stupid. The Witch Queen sighed in boredom. Even if Luoya was close to death, this fierce battle was nothing more than a game in Altacia's eyes. From the moment she appeared, the outcome was already decided. However, it's really wonderful. Is this the bloodline of the Akate family? Altacia lowered her head and looked at her own hands. Then, she gently clenched her fists and experienced the wonderful feeling that was completely different from her own body. The witch narrowed her eyes in enjoyment. What a rare experience. However, because the origin substance is different, it should be quite different from Sir Hiro's orthodox method. Unfortunately, I can only experience it for one night. The white-haired witch stroked her cheek as she spoke. Upon hearing this, Luoya turned his head to look at Altacia. After a long time, he could not help but ask, "Aren't you angry?" The black-haired young man looked at the Witch Queen. Although through a series of schemes, Luoya successfully forced Pulis to break Estrella's dream and obtained the blood of the ancestor, and used it as a medium to temporarily turn Lillian into a nightmare, making it impossible for the witch to stay behind. However, due to her promise, Luoya was not optimistic about Altacia's personal feelings. After all, strictly speaking, the witch was deceived by him. And this deception did not start from this battle, but even earlier, when Luoya saw her for the last time. When Luoya discovered that all the clocks in the dream barrier had paused and the dim campus scene was exceptionally familiar, he understood that the dream barrier was related to the dream guided by the Black Rose Ring. After meeting Estrella again, he was completely sure that the two were of the same origin. The meeting between Luoya and Altacia before the battle was actually all part of his plan. To a certain extent, it was a kind of acting, but he did not expect the witch to make an agreement with him. Under the illumination of the fire, Luoya quietly waited for the witch's anger, but to his surprise, Altacia did not get angry. The white-haired witch blinked and tapped her lips with her finger. "Indeed, my plan failed, but I'm not angry. Like I said, although I like the contradictions and entanglements in your heart, I like the way you look when you defeat them even more. But it's really beyond my expectations. I didn't expect you to use this method to break my deadlock. You made me so excited that I spilled my tea." Altacia smiled happily. The next moment, she suddenly took a step forward and pressed herself against the young man's chest. She looked at Luoya, who was pushed back by something inexplicably soft. She narrowed her eyes and whispered seductively. At that time, Altacia was really contradictory. She knew it was a trick, but she had to go because of the constraints of the agreement. She actually used this method to torture me. Sir Hiro is really evil. However, it's really interesting, so this time, I'll treat it as a reward for Sir Hiro. The Witch Queen smiled and pointed her finger at Luoya's chest. The black-haired young man was silent for a moment before smiling. "Thank you so much. Then, after the lady, let me fulfill the agreement," Luoya said and took a step back, then smiled and stretched out his hand. The witch who saw his action was stunned for a moment and realized something. "Contract? Yes, although that world is gorgeous, it's too boring for you." Indeed, and after Sir Hiro used Altacia violently, she can't leave. Chapter 320. Under the radiance of the morning sun, Estrid heaved a sigh of relief as she gazed at the fallen tree that had turned into ashes. On the other hand, Lillian widened her eyes and blushed. "P pregnant? Wife? Ancestor, what are you talking about?" Of course, it's between you two. It's fine. You don't have to be shy." "I know. Between us?" "Sigh, Lillian. You have to understand. We didn't have this plan when he came to find you. Luoya's situation was really dangerous at that time, and the Akkad family might really have no descendants. But don't worry. Although he did it as a precaution, he definitely has feelings for you. I can see that. The black-haired woman revealed an "I understand" expression and didn't mention that she was the one who instigated it. The intelligent young lady gradually guessed the truth from Estrid's words. Wait, could it be that when Luoya came to visit me, he wanted to? Lillian, who thought of something, looked at the young man who was talking to Antonio in disbelief. Her brain began to heat up rapidly. Estrid smiled, held Lillian's hand, and comforted her under the young lady's dazed gaze. You two will reach this step sooner or later. It's just that this matter sped things up a little. It's nothing. No, I am just a brother and sister. Didn't you guys kiss so passionately just now? Estrid's rhetorical question turned into an arrow that shot straight into Lillian's heart. The young lady's cheeks blushed and her lips trembled, but she couldn't utter a word. The woman with rainbow-colored eyes revealed a smile of an elder. Isn't it great? After all, you two are only related by blood. Although it's a fated connection, it's incomprehensible for people who haven't experienced this feeling. Only after marriage will they treat you two as a family. Huh. Lillian, whose brain was burning with shame, regained her senses after hearing Estrid's words. She looked at the ancestor beside her and suddenly fell into deep thought. Indeed, blood relatives were probably just an incomprehensible coincidence in the eyes of outsiders. In other words, I must form an intimate relationship with Luoya that outsiders can understand. But marriage. What if we don't get married? Not getting married? What are you talking about? Looking at Lillian, who seemed to be troubled by something, Estrid blinked and couldn't help but frown. If you don't get married, what about the child? No, that's why there are no children. Even without the child, do you think your relationship can last long if you don't get married? Huh. The black-haired girl widened her purple eyes upon hearing Estrid's words. The woman with rainbow eyes held her forehead helplessly. You're obviously very smart, so why would you make such a mistake? If that kid really marries someone else, will you do? Of course I am. Wait. Halfway through her words, the girl's purple eyes narrowed slightly. She immediately thought of a fatal problem. She might be able to treat Luoya as a family member in her heart, and she could also say that to others. But the problem was, would others believe her? If Luoya really got married, what would his wife think? Would anyone in this world allow their other half to have a sister who wasn't related by blood but was close to them? Without a doubt, the answer to this question was no. When the time came, the most likely ending for the two would be to gradually separate and not contact each other for many years. In the end, they would be strangers. The girl who discovered the truth fell into a daze for a moment, but at the same time, she also felt a strong sense of anxiety. It was a feeling that was absolutely unacceptable, and also an inexplicable resistance to the fact that the young man might have a loved one in the future. Looking at Lillian, whose expression changed constantly, Estrid pondered for a long time before asking with a serious expression, and it's not just him, and it's not just his problem. Do you really think so yourself? What? Is the feeling in your heart really just the kinship of an elder sister? Or are you actually trying to fill up or avoid something, so you forcefully categorize this feeling as kinship? Chapter 321. Under the night sky of St. Freya Academy, outside the cellar in the mountains, Paul Ackman was thinking about a serious question, and that was a young man and a young woman, spending 2 hours alone in an isolated space at night. What would they usually do? This question could be said to be quite complicated. In Luoya's previous life, there were many different opinions. After all, people had different relationships, different thoughts, and different perspectives when looking at problems. Some people fought together for the survival of mankind in such an environment, while some just played Fight the Landlord for the night. Fortunately, she didn't have a game like Fight the Landlord, and the aristocrats also needed an elegant environment to play chess. These unreliable possibilities were naturally ruled out by Paul, so the remaining answer seemed to be TSK. How is this possible? Paul shook his head at this thought, laughing at himself for thinking too much. Although Big Brother Luoya was an impeccable person in all aspects, that was his royal sister, who was also a famous ice beauty in the Austin Empire. Most importantly, they had different nationalities. How could there be something fishy between an aristocrat and a royal princess of an empire? How was that possible? But that was the truth. It had been more than 2 hours since Luoya entered the cellar, but neither Lillian nor Luoya came out again. As time went by, the atmosphere at the scene became more and more strange. The whispers became louder and louder nearby. Paul recalled the movements in the cellar during this period in detail and found nothing suspicious. There were no explosions, no metallic sounds of swords clashing, and no spell fluctuations, which basically ruled out the possibility of a fight. But in the end, signs were just signs. No one knew whether this would be a turning point. As for the current situation, perhaps the two were discussing further cooperation? Paul touched his chin and thought so, not knowing that he had guessed half of it right. The discussion hadn't happened for the time being, but the further cooperation between the two was basically inevitable. It was just that it wasn't about two factions, but more personal aspects. For example, genetic cooperation. Paul normalized the development of things here, but Jellic next to him was not like this. The gray-haired boy looked at the entrance of the cellar and felt that there was a smell of love floating in the air. Although Jellic didn't know what Luoya saw down there, he guessed that it wasn't anything good. Luoya must have been alone to control her emotions. The fact that Luoya dared to go down alone at such a time actually explains some things. Normally speaking, even if they knew that Lillian was in a bad mood, they would avoid it if they weren't close enough. Even Paul, who was a relative in name, hesitated and didn't stand up for Lillian when she was in trouble. However, Luoya didn't seem to have any hesitation and went down directly. What was it that needed to be discussed to such an extent? Besides, if they really wanted to talk about something important, shouldn't they wait until the other party calmed down? There was no doubt that this was somewhat unreasonable, and another explanation was more likely. That was, the minister was there to comfort Lillian. But if that was the case, it was too different from how they usually had nothing to do with each other. Thinking about it this way, there were very few people in Chris's classroom. Would they be the type who had a good relationship behind closed doors? So after Paul, Jellic also guessed part of the truth, but he still wasn't quite sure. If the door was closed, the relationship between the two wasn't as simple as having a good relationship. The two from the consulting department, who had already guessed it, didn't mean to be too anxious. Paul and Jellic weren't anxious, but the members of the Purple Rose faction were a little restless. 2 hours didn't seem like a long time, but it was inconceivable to the guards who had followed Lillian for many years. After all, no matter what kind of difficulty she faced, Lillian had never been able to calm down for more than an hour. Of course, the most important thing was that Lillian wasn't alone. Luoya was still inside. The unprecedented situation made the personal guards gradually anxious, but when they recalled Lillian's order at that time, no one dared to directly disobey it. After thinking for a while, the Purple Rose faction stared at Paul. Although they were unwilling, if there was anyone present who could enter the cellar to check out the situation, it would undoubtedly be Paul. Whether it was his identity as the Aikman family or his position as the deputy minister of the consulting department, he was very suitable. Besides, Lillian's order didn't include Paul. With several reasons added together, Paul and Ackman accepted the order and went down into the cellar under everyone's expectant gazes. At this time, in the depths of the cellar, after the returning light had been extinguished for a long time, the two figures gradually began to regain consciousness. Lillian's consciousness woke up in a haze. The first thing she felt was the coldness of the ground and the pungent smell of blood. The young lady blinked in a daze. Then, her purple eyes gradually widened. She sat up abruptly and looked to her side. The moment she saw another familiar figure not far away, she heaved a sigh of relief and almost cried tears of joy. They're back. They're really back. The two of them are back together. After experiencing a thrilling adventure on the edge of life and death, the two of them returned in one piece. This ordinary wish was once an extravagant wish in that historical fragment, and the moment it came true, even Lillian couldn't help but feel excited. The young lady struggled to stand up and pounced on the young man beside her. Luoya also seemed to sense the movement nearby and gradually opened her eyes. Senior, yes, we're back? Chapter 322. What kind of creature is this? Is there such an adorable creature in the world? Lillian's almost frozen mind thought as she looked at the unconscious young man in her arms. She had fair and tender skin, cute and nimble long eyelashes, cherry-colored lips, and small ears. Her messy black hair paired with her gentle and beautiful appearance made it hard for people to tell whether she was a man or a woman. Her soft and supple body made people want to hug her. Lillian looked at the young man and suddenly felt her mind hazy as if he was tempting her to kiss him. However, the young girl who had just lowered her head suddenly came back to her senses. No. How did Luoya turn into a child? This is... Lillian called out the young man's name as she recalled how abnormal the situation was. She panicked for a moment. Although his appearance had changed greatly and his age did not match, Lillian was certain that the child in her arms was Luoya. This was a fact told to her by her almost imperceptible bloodline. However, even so, Lillian was still unable to accept it. Luoya became smaller? How was this possible? Over the millennia, the extraordinary individuals of Xia had developed thousands of curses. However, no matter if it was the curses themselves or the side effects, very few of them were related to time and space. Lillian had heard that the side effect was aging, but she had never heard of shrinking. It had to be said that the Crown Stone's situation far exceeded Lillian's imagination. The side effects were also extremely severe. The black-haired young girl hugged the young man and roughly sensed Luoya's condition. The current Luoya had almost no curses on his body. Although the power of his bloodline still existed, it was maintained at an unprecedentedly low activity level. If Lillian's guess was correct, the young man had most likely lost his supernatural powers and returned to his childhood state. It was unknown how long this situation would last. After inspecting the young man's body, Lillian fell silent for a moment. The current situation was undoubtedly severe, but for some reason, she felt that it was more than that. When Lillian first saw Luoya's appearance, she was stunned and couldn't help but want to get close to her. At that time, she thought it was the effect of her bloodline. But when she discovered that Luoya's bloodline activity was extremely low, she felt that something was wrong. It seemed that it wasn't just becoming smaller. In a way, becoming smaller was also becoming younger. Was this really a side effect? There seemed to be something even more deadly. With that thought in mind, Lillian reached out her hand to caress the young man's cheek. But the moment her fingers touched the tender skin, a strange feeling appeared in her heart. It was a strange temptation, a desire that seemed to originate from human instincts to get close to the young man. Just by touching him, Lillian felt a subtle change in her body, as if she had gained some inexplicable vitality. The strange feeling caused the black-haired girl to frown and think deeply. After a moment, the princess who thought of something slowly widened her eyes. Wait, could it be that he's leaking time? Lillian finally discovered the truth of the matter. Her purple pupils suddenly shrank, and her face visibly paled within a few seconds. Her lips also began to tremble slightly. Oh no! A strong sense of danger flashed through Lillian's mind, and it rapidly expanded. To put it simply, leaking time was actually sharing time with others. Even though Lillian didn't know if this effect was permanent or temporary, there was one thing that was without a doubt. The ability born from this side effect was a disaster. If there were any abilities in this world that could consign the user to eternal damnation, then the ability to restore one's youth would definitely be at the top of the list. Even in Xia, where supernatural powers existed, most of the higher-ups and rulers of the races couldn't escape one thing: aging. No matter if it was a proud warrior, a saint who saved the world, a criminal who committed heinous crimes, or a traitor of the race, they were all equal in the face of time. Millions of years had passed, and the dragons that soared in the sky had vanished. The giants that galloped across the land had also vanished without a trace. Even for these mythical creatures with lifespans of tens of thousands of years, time was an existence that they could only shake their heads and sigh. As for humans, as a species with a short lifespan, Their desire for longevity was much stronger than those long-lived races. And now, a secret treasure that was perfect and far surpassed any ritual or medicine had appeared. Just by touching it, it could restore one's youth. It was a beautiful young man who had lost all resistance and possessed a strong charm. When these words were put together, it was basically the greatest temptation in the world. The noblewomen of the Austin Empire would definitely go crazy over this. In the face of such temptation, all friends could become enemies. The Akkad family's bloodline was indeed powerful, but Luoya was far from reaching the end. At least for now, he was still unable to protect himself, especially in this young state. If he was caught by someone with ulterior motives and controlled by medicine or curses during the side effect period, the consequences would be unimaginable. Absolutely not. Absolutely not let anyone know about this. Lillian's face was pale as she trembled and stroked the young man. She forced herself to calm down. The first thing she could be sure of was that she couldn't stay in the academy any longer. There were too many people here who knew Luoya, and information could be leaked at any time. And if Lillian recalled correctly, Luoya had indeed told her that there were more than one evil cult members in the academy. Chapter 323. Saint Mestre Theocracy, Akkad Territory. Under the light in the study, a silver-haired girl was carefully studying the report in her hand, and next to her hand was a large number of documents that had been processed. It was early summer, and the climate in Akkad Territory was mild, so there was no curse vessel to maintain the temperature in the house. The window of the study was open, and the night wind blew through the gauze curtain, making people feel cool. Under the soft moonlight, AI Lizzie wore silver-framed glasses on the bridge of her small nose. She looked at the documents in front of her with a calm and elegant face, but her heart was full of emotions. Sure enough, my elder brother is a genius. Looking at the financial report in her hand, AI Lizzie sighed a little, and her heart was full of admiration for Luoya. It had been more than 2 months since Luoya left Akkad Territory to study at St. Freya College. The only member of the Akkad family in Akkad Territory was his daughter, AI Lizzie Akkad. After her elder brother left, AI Lizzie naturally took over Luoya's previous work and continued to lead Akkad Territory on the path set by Luoya. Originally, Luoya was very hesitant about AI Lizzie's succession. One of the main reasons was that AI Lizzie was too young and had not yet reached adulthood. Her usual personality was so soft that she might be deceived and wronged as a leader due to her lack of prestige. Another reason was that the girl had never been involved in the family's internal affairs. Although Luoya had always treated AI Lizzie as an irreplaceable family member and was almost infinitely tolerant and spoiled, AI Lizzie was very strict with herself, especially in the internal affairs. She had never been arrogant because she was spoiled. The management of military intelligence was also a task given by Kadia. Therefore, AI Lizzie, who usually did not go out, had limited knowledge of the great development in the territory in recent years. However, because she couldn't easily hand over the family to an outsider, and also because she didn't want to appear useless, when Luoya was hesitating, the girl took the initiative to take on the burden of the family for the first time. Luoya was surprised, but in order to encourage AI Lizzie, he immediately agreed. As a result, AI Lizzie became the de facto leader of Akkad. After taking over the position of Luoya, the girl truly experienced her elder brother's talent. Not to mention the other familiar policies, just the financial report in his hand was far beyond AI Lizzie's imagination. During Luoya's tenure, he had formulated many general policies for the Akkad territory. He had also reformed the accounting system and invented a new system called the 3-column accounting system. Originally, the Akkad territory would take 2 months at the end of each year. With this new accounting system, a dozen people could sort out the financial data in half a month, saving a lot of time and manpower. There was no doubt that this was a highly professional and genius invention in the industry. However, when this method was first introduced, it was said that many people were against it. The objectors thought that there were benefits to using this method, but it was likely to cause a large number of financial staff to lose their jobs, which would negatively affect the territory. This concern became a mainstream thought, even to the point that the financial officer had to look for Luoya to discuss it. However, after listening to the financial officer's report, Luoya laughed. "Don't worry, it won't happen. You will only get busier." This was Luoya's original words at the time. AI Lizzie, who happened to be there, had a deep impression of it. But at the time, she thought, elder brother's confident look is so handsome. Yes, that's right. This was what AI Lizzie thought at the time. During that time, the girl was especially obsessed with her elder brother's appearance when he was working seriously. Whenever she had time, she would find an excuse to accompany him in the office and peek at him. Without a doubt, that was a period of time that made her heart beat wildly. But now, after becoming the helmsman of Acate, AI Lizzie saw the results of this incident that she didn't pay attention to at the time. Luoya's words that no one understood at the time, and were only used as comforting words, came true. No, it should be said that his words that seemed to be a prediction were completely accurate. Not only did the financial staff not lose their jobs, but they also became the most popular job in Acate for the past 2 years. The reason was very simple. It was because of the 3-column bookkeeping method. This convenient and convenient bookkeeping method did indeed greatly reduce the manpower, but at the same time, it also greatly increased the efficiency of business activities. For example, before this, when large caravans transacted in Acate, they had to estimate the cost, calculate the fees, quote, audit, deduct taxes, and many other processes. Basically, they had to wait for 10 days to half a month before they could clear the complicated accounts and leave. This was under the condition that they didn't make a mistake. But with the new method, it was basically settled in 3 days. This was equivalent to saving 10 days of time for the merchants. For the merchants, time was wealth. Saving 10 days of food and horses was considered small. What was more important was the frequency. If they saved 10 days, they would be able to make one more trip. This was equivalent to a large amount of income. For the shrewd merchants who stared at the profits every day, it was simply great news. They were all merchants. If they went to Acate, they could make a lot more money. If they didn't go, wouldn't their brains be kicked by a donkey? Outside merchants flocked to Acate, but the merchants in the territory were even happier. This was because they didn't have much money. They basically used it all to buy goods. If they didn't pay the bills, they wouldn't have any cash flow. They didn't have a single cent on them, so they could only wait for the financial staff. But now that this time was greatly reduced, they could also engage in more business activities. Then, of course, with more business activities, there would be more jobs, and the flow of goods and materials would be faster. In the end, you wouldn't be able to pay the bills, right? Do you need a financial staff? Yes, this was the reason why financial staff were so popular. When AI Lizzie sorted out this logic, she also deeply understood one thing. That was, her elder brother was really a genius. AI Lizzie believed that if it wasn't for the burden of the Acate bloodline, her elder brother, who was focused on business, could even build the Acate family into a big family like Sorophia. At that time, AI Lizzie would become the guardian of the family and live happily with Luoya, who was just an ordinary person. TSK, wouldn't it be perfect? Every time she thought of this possibility, AI Lizzie felt bitter. However, there were no ifs in reality. Luoya had already awakened, and the fox spirits came one after another. Thinking of the blonde princess and the reddish-brown young lady, AI Lizzie's heart was in a mess. She couldn't look at the documents in her hands anymore. The silver-haired girl looked back at the moonlight and sighed. She knew that she had to relax. Thinking so, the girl walked out of the study and strode towards Luoya's room. She began the only way to relax when he wasn't around, rolling in the sheets. Chapter 324. Oh, it's Big Brother's scent. In the dark room, the silver-haired girl hugged the boy's pillow and took deep breaths with her eyes closed. Then, she began to roll around on Luoya's bed happily. That's right, this was AI Lizzie's biggest and most effective entertainment activity after Luoya left home. There was nothing that couldn't be solved by rolling around on the bed once. If there was, then she would roll around again. Ever since AI Lizzie was about to reach adulthood, especially after AI Lizzie's mistake, Luoya strictly forbade AI Lizzie from climbing into his bed. However, the girl still persisted. After all, AI Lizzie wasn't afraid of being reprimanded at all. As long as she cried, Luo Ya's heart would immediately soften, and he would even coax her. However, as the saying goes, know thyself and know thy enemy. Luo Ya also understood his own shortcomings, so he changed his strategy. As long as AI Lizzie climbed into his bed once, the boy would stay the night in the office. This time, AI Lizzie couldn't stand it anymore. Every time she waited for him to come home, her eyes would be filled with tears. Because of this countermeasure, the girl couldn't get on Luo Ya's bed for a long time. She could only occasionally peek at his sleeping face under the moonlight in the middle of the night. So this time, after Luo Ya left, the first thing AI Lizzie did was to occupy Luo Ya's room. That was how her hobby of rolling around on the bed came about. Of course, other than when she was in a bad mood, AI Lizzie would also come. Every morning, she would roll around to replenish Luo Ya's nutrients. She would also roll around at night so that she could dream of Big Brother. The silver-haired girl relaxed on the bed. Outside the door, Anna carefully closed the door for the young miss who was having a shameful hobby. She held her forehead and sighed helplessly. Since Luo Ya left home and AI Lizzie took over the position of acting overlord of Akate territory, Anna often saw her young miss frowning as she looked at the information left behind by the young master. Occasionally, she would be disappointed because she couldn't understand it. Every time this happened, Anna wanted to help, but there was a limit to what she could do. As Luo Ya's personal maid, Anna had actually acted as Luo Ya's secretary for a long time. Under the influence of Luo Ya, she had a deep understanding of the territory. But even so, she was still confused about many of Luo Ya's decisions. Young Miss is already a genius for being able to learn so many things in such a short time. I don't think there's any need to feel disappointed. Anna had said similar words to her more than once, but AI Lizzie was still worried that she would disappoint Luo Ya. However, that didn't seem to be the case today. Perhaps she was just missing the young master. Recently, AI Lizzie's yearning had been increasing day by day. As the president of Luo Ya X AI Lizzie's fan club, Anna was very clear about this point. But it had to be said that the way the young miss alleviated her yearning was too unladylike. No matter what, she had rolled around on young master's bed and whatnot. Moreover, those clothes had already been washed and changed. Anna rubbed her temples in confusion. She couldn't figure out where the so-called elder brother's smell came from. She could only attribute it to her young Mrs. Unique psychological comfort. At this time in the room, AI Lizzie stopped after rolling around on the bed. She hugged Luo Ya's pillow and gently took off her glasses. A year had passed since the incident with Luo Ya, and AI Lizzie had changed quite a bit. The most obvious changes were her glasses and her twin ponytails. As an extraordinaire with a perfect origin form, AI Lizzie's body naturally wouldn't be short-sighted. Her glasses were plain glasses and didn't have any visual aids. They were purely decorative. The reason she wore them was because of Luo Ya's praise. AI Lizzie always feels more intellectual when she wears glasses. At that time, the boy didn't expect that his words would be firmly remembered by the girl. Later on, when Elisa accompanied him to read books, she would often transform into a bespectacled girl. As for the hairstyle, it was changed by Elisa herself. In the face of fiercer and fiercer enemies, she had to increase her feminine charm. This was the goal that AI Lizzie had been working towards for the past year. For this reason, she conducted a lot of research and found that Luo Ya seemed to pay special attention to this relatively rare hairstyle. After discovering Luo Ya's preference, AI Lizzie decisively attacked, and the results were very obvious. With this hairstyle, AI Lizzie achieved the achievement of taking an afternoon nap together. It had been a long time since she fell asleep beside her elder brother. With the young girl's efforts, the situation between the two could be said to be very good. However, everything was interrupted by the matter of Luo Ya going to school at St. Freya Academy. AI Lizzie couldn't do anything about it. She could only manage the territory well and wait for Luo Ya to come back for the holidays to reward her. As for the matter of Nua Iyer and Xiaoluo being at the academy, AI Lizzie was naturally unwilling to accept it. However, she wasn't too worried about it. After all, Xiaoluo and Nua Iyer were both by Luo Ya's side at the same time. AI Lizzie knew all too well what would happen. Of course, it would be to drag the other party down. If it was anywhere else, the Saint Maester Empire might be able to suppress the Rose commercial United Nations. However, this was not necessarily the case at St. Freya Academy because the Serofia family was the school's biggest financial backer. In other words, Xia Luot had a certain home advantage. When the time came, when the two of them fought fiercely, there was a 99% chance that the other party would benefit. And who would that other party be? Wasn't it obvious? Thinking of this, the young girl slightly puffed out her chest and revealed a smile as if everything was under her control. In an academy full of outsiders, who would have a better reason to get close to Luoya than her in the name of family? When school starts next year, it will be the time to kill and reach the top. What new ire, Xiaoluot, it's just SOSO. Hee, it's settled. AI Lizzie hugged the pillow and revealed an expectant smile. Then, she remembered another piece of information. Oh, right, they still have an enemy. Chapter 325. Thousands of miles away. When the two girls who discovered Luo Ya's situation were performing the same dream in the same world. In the cellar, the black-haired boy was shivering in a dark corner. Paul Aikman, at this time, felt that he had reached the fork in his 16 years of life. Not long ago, Paul, who was entrusted by both the security department and the consulting department to inquire about the news, went down to the cellar. Originally, this trip was not a big deal, but what the boy didn't expect was that he accidentally witnessed something that shouldn't be seen. Due to the nauseating bloody smell in the cellar, Paul began to feel nauseous not long after he went down for the second time. He had to hold his breath and endure the nausea to move forward, so he didn't call out the names of the two people below. But he never expected that when he crossed the bloody cellar to the deepest part of the two people, he would see that scene. Under the faint light in the cellar, Paul did vaguely see his sister, the Austin Empire's Empress, Lillian Aikman, pouncing on someone and taking off their clothes. Hearing the sound of clothes sliding, Paul was dumbfounded. He stuck his body firmly to the wall and didn't dare to move. He didn't expect that his respected big brother Luoya and his sister were really doing this kind of thing underground for 2 hours. Aren't you guys too picky about the environment? No matter what, here. Wait, it seems that because of this place, no one else doubts it. So, it's actually dark under the light? The black-haired boy's eyes widened, feeling that he had grasped the truth, but then he felt that his worldview had been greatly impacted. No, this is too exciting. Clandestinely having an affair with dozens of people in 2 departments was indeed a rare opportunity. But, did Royal Sister actually like to pursue excitement in her heart? And Big Brother Luoya also, however, before Paul could figure it out, Lillian's voice came faintly. What child, what time? What can't be known? What no destination? And such words were captured by the boy's ears one by one, making Paul's cheeks gradually pale. Wait, something's not right. What are they discussing? Child, time, can't let anyone know, no destination. When these words were put together and combined with their current situation, a phrase naturally appeared in Paul's mind. He seemed to have figured out their current situation. Elope. The two of them were planning to elope, and the reason was easy to guess from these few words. Although Paul didn't know how Luoya and Lillian developed their relationship, it was obvious that such an intimate relationship couldn't have been formed in a day or two. They had probably been in contact with each other in private for more than a month since they entered the school. The two should have fallen in love and got married, resulting in Lillian's accidental pregnancy. Now that he thought about it, he found the reason why Sister Royal did not dare to come out. It was because other people vomited because of the smell of blood. They would be fine after coming out, but Sister Royal could not. It was because she was vomiting during pregnancy. At this thought, Paul seemed to have been enlightened instantly. He widened his eyes and felt his mind clear up all of a sudden. The context of the matter was also clear. Pregnancy vomiting was not dependent on the occasion. Once they left this place, Lillian's inexplicable vomiting would definitely attract the attention of the royal physicians. When the time came for a diagnosis, everything would be exposed. This should be the content of their child's words. As for the time, it should be the time of pregnancy. He remembered that the aunties in the village said that symptoms would appear after a month of pregnancy. The timing was also exactly right. At this thought, Paul broke out in a cold sweat instantly and felt his body stiffen. Even though he was ignorant, he knew that the two of them were in big trouble now. No wonder they didn't come out for 2 hours. They must be thinking of all kinds of countermeasures. It seemed like Sister Royal couldn't bear to abort the child, so she suggested eloping without a destination. Paul understood Lillian's feelings. After all, she was the child's mother. It must be painful to kill the flesh and blood in her stomach. But wasn't eloping too bold? The impact would probably sweep across the entire human world. However, if they didn't elope, as one of them was the princess of the Austin Empire, while the other was a great noble of the Saint Maester Empire, this kind of relationship would definitely be suppressed by the two countries, and the two would almost certainly be separated. At that time, Emperor Lucas would definitely force his sister to abort the child. Lillian was currently at the 3rd level of the source rank, while Luo Ye was at the 4th level of the source rank. With their extraordinary powers, even if they concealed their identities and fled to a faraway place, they wouldn't face too many difficulties in life. After all, their strength was there for all to see. But if they committed treason, they probably wouldn't be able to return to their respective countries in the future. They would no longer have such noble identities. In other words, this was a choice between love and glory and wealth. Sister Royal, who proposed to elope, undoubtedly gave up the throne and chose love and the fruit of their love. This fully reflected a woman's sensitivity toward love. But what about Luo Ye's elder brother? If Paul recalled correctly, Luo Ye should be the only son in the family. Would he be willing to give up everything and his bright future for Sister Royal and their child? Or would he be the complete opposite and force Sister Royal to abort the child? Faced with this choice, Paul didn't know the right answer at all. Chapter 326. Under the moonlight, Lillian Ackman and the elf quickly traversed the fog-filled forest under the guidance of the elf. It had been 2 hours since Lillian burst out of the cellar. She had been moving forward in the forest. She did not choose to leave St. Freya Academy through the regular roads. Instead, she chose to leave Leinster through the misty forest outside the academy because the two of them were too conspicuous. Putting aside Lillian, who would attract attention wherever she went in St. Freya Academy, even Luo Ye was particularly eye-catching at this time. After all, there were countless teachers in the academy who were older than the students, but there were only a few who were younger. Especially now that Luo Ye was in such a state. The black-haired girl gently lowered her head and looked at the boy in her arms with the help of the moonlight. At this time, under the hazy moonlight, the sleeping boy's smooth skin seemed to be glowing. His lovely eyelashes fluttered slightly with the wind. His upper and lower eyelids were well-defined. His eyebrows were slender and delicate. His nose was straight. His lips were rosy, and his ears were like delicate little shells. With just a glance at the boy in her arms, Lillian's heart skipped a beat as if it was shot by something. Her breathing, which could not be disrupted even after crossing mountains and forests, suddenly became disordered. Her brain was burning, and her body was hot. Realizing that she was not in the right state, the girl hurriedly averted her gaze. The strange feeling that kept surging in her body made her pull at the collar of her clothes. She used the cool night air to regain her calmness and took 2 deep breaths to calm her emotions. Yes, this was the second reason why Lillian chose not to appear in front of everyone. The temptation of Luo Ye now was too strong. Her mere existence was enough to attract everyone's attention. This time, although Lillian only made a hasty decision to leave with Luo Ye in a short period of time, it did not mean that Lillian did not consider anything. Leaving the message that there were still remnants of the enemy in the cellar was one of her methods of delaying the enemy. Whether it was her or Luo Ye, their identities were very sensitive. If they disappeared without a slightly reasonable reason, it would almost certainly cause a huge commotion. Remember this in a second, The excuse of chasing after the cultists might not work for a long time, but it could still last for a day or two. A day or two was more than enough time for Lillian, who was at level 3 of source rank, to leave the area around Leinster. At that time, she would write a letter to Chris and ask for an outstation mission. This way, she would be able to control the influence within the school for the time being. Of course, controlling it was only to prevent it from escalating into a missing person case. There would definitely be all sorts of speculations among the students, and it might even cause a huge impact. There would also be all sorts of scandals between the two of them. However, they couldn't care less about that now. Besides, judging from the cold relationship between the two of them in front of outsiders, how serious could the rumors be? The black-haired girl smiled and shook her head at the thought, feeling proud of their secret contact. But what Lillian didn't know was that she had unknowingly become the representative of liberal love who got pregnant out of wedlock and suggested eloping. But then again, rumors didn't seem to be that annoying. The black-haired girl glanced at the boy in her arms, and then immediately looked away, her face slightly red. Lillian, who had a cold personality, never cared about what others thought of her. But this time, the girl had a strange feeling. It wasn't disgust, but more like an inexplicable expectation. What will they think of us? Will they think that we're compatible? Or will they think that there won't be anything between us since we're of different nationalities? Looks like I can't leave tonight. All sorts of strange thoughts mixed with her hot body and other factors made Lillian, who felt her own condition, decide to rest. The girl panted and immediately began to search for a place to rest. In St. Freya Academy's 1,000 years of history, there were quite a number of mountain villas built by the Academy and the students who were nobles. Lillian did not spend too much time to find one that was not bad. Based on various guesses, it was probably a summer retreat for some nobles in the mountains in the middle of summer. Seeing this, as the head of the security department, Lillian didn't hesitate at all and decisively requisitioned the house with the best conditions. With a gentle sweep of the curses in front of the door was immediately unlocked with a click. The black-haired girl opened the door and entered the hall. She carried the boy who was wrapped in a ball of clothes upstairs to the bedroom. Walking down the stairs under the moonlight and down the dimly lit corridor, Lillian carried the young man into the room and came to the front of the big, soft bed with gauze curtains. Both the bed and the room were very clean as if for convenience. But now, the young lady wasn't thinking about that. Instead, she was thinking about something more important. Should I sleep together? Lillian Ackman stood by the wide bed, breathing rapidly and swallowing mouthfuls of saliva. She felt that her body was starting to burn again. Although the relationship between the two was quite deep after experiencing the crisis of the historical fragment, she had to admit that Luoya still valued the difference between men and women. The evidence was that the two had never slept on the same bed, whether they were at the headquarters of the Saint Heroes Society or recuperating in St. Freya Academy. The Austin Empire had always been known for its tradition and conservatism. If an unmarried woman slept on the same bed as the opposite sex, it basically meant that she had given up on all other men. To put it bluntly, this behavior was no different from a private pledge. Luoya took this custom into consideration, so she decided to sleep alone for half a night. But now, faced with the same choice, Lillian hesitated. There were many spare rooms, and it was impossible for the two of them to be pursued tonight. All the external conditions showed that they didn't need to sleep together. But standing in front of the bed, the black-haired girl couldn't move her feet. Lillian stared at the boy whose shoulders were half exposed in the messy clothes. Her purple eyes slid along the slender collarbone to the delicate face above, as if she was caressing it. Suddenly, she felt that a bed didn't seem like much. Private pledge? Does that mean I'll take care of and protect this child for a lifetime? She felt a heavy sense of responsibility just by reading it. People who hadn't even confirmed their relationship would definitely stay away from it. But at this time, Lillian's mind was filled with a completely different thought. Is there such a good thing? The girl stared at the lips of the boy on the bed and suddenly recalled the kiss that the witch controlled not long ago. That was a way of kissing that Lillian had never imagined before. It was different from the warmth of a chick pecking at rice. It was a kiss that filled her body. That feeling made Lillian intoxicated and lost herself. As for now, it made her curious. What does it feel like to kiss someone who has become like this? The girl's gaze gradually straightened. Under the moonlight, she couldn't help but lower her body. Chapter 327. What do these lips taste like? Beside the bed shrouded by the gauze curtain, the black-haired girl stared at the young man's lips and let her imagination run wild. Is it sweet or bitter? Is it cool or hot? Can it ease the scorching heat in her heart a little? Or will it intensify until it erupts completely? Lillian Aikman didn't know the answer to these questions, but her body was slowly leaning forward. Their lips were getting closer and closer, and when they were 20 centimeters away from Luo Ya's cheek, the young man let out an unconscious moan. The moment she heard Luo Ya's moan, the girl, who intended to steal a kiss, stood up abruptly. Her fiery brain instantly sobered up as though a bucket of cold water had been poured over it. Fortunately, this action didn't fall into Luo Ya's eyes. The young man just let out a little sound and fell asleep again. Huff, huff. Seeing Luo Ya fall into silence again, the girl, who was breathing rapidly, was slightly relieved. After staring blankly at the young man for a long time, the girl stretched out her hand to cover her cheek and muttered to herself, "No, that's not right. What am I doing?" Since Luo Ya's problem until now, Lillian had been examining her inner self for more than 2 hours and had to admit that she was a little abnormal. Roja's body had a certain degree of charm, there was no doubt about it. But as a third-level source-level transcendent, without touching his body, the charm's effect wouldn't be very good. It might even have no effect. In other words, Lillian's current state wasn't due to external factors, but more due to internal factors, such as some special preferences. And Luo Ya's current situation, to a certain extent, had hit her soft spot, or rather, XP. Lillian didn't know how to describe this strong burning desire to protect, get close to him, and want to wrap him up with doting. But she knew that this was abnormal, especially the greed for the young man's body. It was undoubtedly something that an elder sister shouldn't do. But on the other hand, the stimulation called the sense of betrayal was constantly provoking her nerves, making her feel as though she was stuck in a quagmire. As an elder sister, I shouldn't have done this. I shouldn't have done this. I shouldn't be this kind of woman. But, the young girl's breathing quickened as she stared at the figure on the bed. Her trembling hands reached out to grab onto Luo Ya's ill-fitting clothes. As long as she exerted a little force, the youth's body would be completely exposed in front of her. At that time, she was afraid that she would no longer be able to resist her desire to get close to him, and might even commit a crime. Although Lillian and Luo Ya weren't related by blood, they were related by blood. Luo Ya should also see her as her elder sister. But at the thought of having sex with Luo Ya, Lillian's brain didn't feel resistance at this time, but a strange excitement and stimulation. Her hand that held the youth's messy clothes trembled incessantly. Lillian's expression kept changing, but after a few minutes, the love in the girl's purple eyes finally triumphed over her lust. "No, I can't do this. He will hate me." With that thought in mind, Lillian sighed in disappointment. But to her surprise, she heard a woman's voice. "Hee, I didn't expect you to be able to endure it. This is really beyond my expectations." The moment she heard the familiar voice, Lillian's pupils shrank abruptly. In the blink of an eye, spell power was released from her fingertips and transformed into a sword that she pointed behind her. Behind her, the white-haired, red-eyed demoness leaped gently and hovered in midair. "Oh, are you angry at being peeked at? Lillian Aikman. Why are you here?" "Demoness." The black-haired young girl pointed her sword at the figure in midair. She was vigilant and puzzled at the same time. After Luo Ya's body returned to its childhood state due to the side effects, the youth's bloodline abilities were almost completely sealed. He couldn't even cast ordinary spells, let alone an existence of Altatia's level. But what she didn't expect was that the demoness narrowed her eyes in delight. Altatia curled her lips and looked at the figure on the bed before looking at Lillian in front of her. She then replied happily, "Don't worry. Do you still remember the spell that allowed you to combine your powers?" "What? That spell actually used my blood before yours." Upon hearing the demoness words, Lillian couldn't help but widen her eyes. Altacia chuckled. By then, you should already be the emperor of a massive empire. But unfortunately, the pain and torment of separation will definitely turn you into a tyrant. You will definitely do things that will plunge the people into misery and suffering. It's only a matter of time before you become his enemy. Unfortunately, Lord Hero can't stop you because he will be soft-hearted at critical moments. He won't be able to kill you, so you will definitely use this advantage to defeat him. By then, your twisted love will definitely make you kill all the women around him. What will happen if you lose control of your possessiveness? Imprisonment? He will definitely hate you, but you will be the only one by his side. Both of you will struggle between love and hate, and then provide each other with warmth. Heh, what a sadomasochistic love that one can't extricate oneself from. The witch relished in her prophecy. Along with Altacia's words, Lillian's eyes gradually widened, and then she couldn't help but waver. "No, shut up. I can't possibly. Don't answer yet, Lillian." Gazing at the agitated black-haired young lady, Altacia placed her finger on her lips, narrowed her eyes, and smiled. "Nothing has happened yet. What I'm saying is nothing more than my prediction of the future. But you should understand by now how big the possibility of this prediction is. After all, you were tempted, weren't you?" The moment the witch spoke, Lillian's body trembled, and her purple pupils shrunk abruptly. That's right. The reason why Lillian wavered was because after listening to this terrifying story, she didn't know where the anticipation and desire arose in her heart. Although it wasn't much, it proved that such dark thoughts did indeed exist in her heart. Her inner reaction left the young lady speechless. The white-haired witch smiled, took 2 steps back, and consoled her. "It's all right. Humans are creatures of both good and evil. If you don't like to become a tyrant, then you can only conquer him. Especially now, when you have the best chance." Chapter 329. My body is so heavy. In his hazy consciousness, Luoya slowly opened his eyes and looked at the ceiling that he had never seen before. It was a pure white cloth with a faint golden pattern. It had a soft texture that made people want to touch it, and there was a white gauze curtain fluttering beside it. Looking at this scene that he had never seen before, Luoya was slightly stunned, and then his slow brain slowly turned. No, it's not a ceiling. This is the ceiling of a princess bed? Although he had never slept on a princess bed before, Luoya, who was experienced and knowledgeable, quickly recognized the origin of the cloth. He looked around in confusion, but the scene he saw surprised him. It's so far from both sides, and the bed is so big. Wait, the clothes are so loose. Oh, it must have been torn during the battle. With this thought in mind, the black-haired teenager observed his surroundings and sat up with his hands on the bed. He squinted his cute eyes and rubbed his messy hair. He felt dizzy until the breeze outside the window blew up the gauze curtain in front of him. A cute figure suddenly appeared in the mirror of the dressing table opposite him. It was a child about 7 or 8 years old, like a pure-blooded elf in a fairy tale. He had pearl-white skin, cat-like golden eyes, and vermilion lips with a faint luster. His lazy appearance, as if he had just woken up, made people want to hug him. The moment he saw the stranger, Luoya's consciousness quickly woke up. He opened his eyes wide and hurriedly looked around, but the result made him stunned. Where is he? I did see a child just now. Wait. Halfway through his thoughts, the young man suddenly had a premonition of the truth. He lowered his head and looked at his loose but intact clothes. He then opened his hand and looked at his small palm. Suddenly, his eyes widened. He hurriedly crawled to the bed and pulled open the curtain to look at the mirror. This is me? Luoya, who finally uncovered the truth, stared at himself in the mirror and fell into a daze. and the reason for this instantly flashed through his mind. It's a side effect. In Shia, where time spells were almost non-existent, only the side effects of 6 calamities could cause him to become like this. After figuring out the cause of the matter, Luoya came back to his senses and began to sense his condition in a panic. However, the result was completely unacceptable to him. Luoya's bloodline had basically fallen into a deep sleep. Whether it was the Gulen Daer or the Paitila, they could not be contacted at all. It was as if the curse power had disappeared. Luoya was basically in a state where it was almost non-existent. In other words, it was not just her appearance that had changed. Right now, Luoya's combat power was basically no different from an ordinary child. How could this be? Right, there's still the system. But in this unprecedented situation, Luoya truly panicked for the first time. After losing almost all of his power, the only thing that remained in the youth's body was the system. However, this did not affect the youth's battle prowess much. For so many years, Luoya basically did not rely on this French thing to fight, and now that he had no curse power and no money, what could he do even if he had the system? Realizing that his body had undergone a series of drastic changes, the black-haired youth fell into a state of confusion. He covered his forehead and tried to think, but the uneasiness in his heart grew bigger and bigger like a whirlpool. The sense of powerlessness and helplessness that he had never felt before made his body gradually began to tremble. No, I have to calm down. It has already happened. Right, where am I now? Senior sister? Looking at the room that he had never seen before, Luoya was at a loss for a moment. But before he could jump out of bed to look for clues, the door of the bathroom suddenly opened. Creak. The moment he heard the wooden door open, the black-haired youth's body trembled in panic. He could not help but look to the side, but in the next moment, his eyes widened. In the room, the person who appeared opposite the fairy-like youth was a young girl who had just come out of the shower. Her body was still covered in dreamy water vapor. She was the senior sister that Luoya had been searching for, but right now, she was quite different from how she usually was. Her skin was white and slightly warm, with light pink skin. Her hair was slightly moist, which contrasted sharply with her skin tone. Her exquisite face was impeccable, and her slender body showed off her perfect proportions. The cold elegance and nobility that originally belonged to royalty seemed to have been diluted in this private environment, turning into a temptation that attracted people to get close to her. A white bath towel covered Lillian's luxurious body from her chest to the middle of her thighs, but it also outlined the outline of her body to the greatest extent. She had a bulging chest, a slender waist, and a flat lower abdomen. Below her flat lower abdomen was a pair of white and slender legs that could not be seen due to her Austin Empire long dress. Senior sister's body is so beautiful. The moment he saw Lillian, Luoya almost reflexively froze as if he had seen a stunning piece of art. On the other side, the black-haired girl's eyes widened when she saw the youth, but she suddenly regained her senses after a while. Luoya. After calling out to him, Lillian almost instantly wanted to pounce in front of him. But just as she moved, she suddenly noticed that apart from shock, there was also a hint of fear in the youth's golden eyes. He even couldn't help but take a few steps back. Lillian was stunned for a moment, but then she immediately understood the situation. Chapter 330. In the early morning, the black-haired girl walked up to the young man's bed. In front of her, Luoya's face was already flushed red. Currently, Luoya was feeling very conflicted. On one hand, his instinctive fear was urging him to stay away from Lillian. On the other hand, the girl's body, which seemed to be the embodiment of the word beauty itself, was right in front of him. Her beauty was mixed with fear, giving birth to a unique demonic feeling that kept provoking his nerves. Scary, but so beautiful. He wanted to get closer to her. Such a temptation was born in his heart. As Lillian got closer, this conflicted feeling became more and more intense, causing the young man to be unable to advance or retreat. In order to get closer to Luoya, She lowered her body and climbed onto the bed. The towel wrapped around Lillian's body naturally loosened due to her movements. Her delicate collarbone with water droplets and her smooth, white shoulders gradually got closer. What followed was a wave of hot air from the bathroom. As if she felt that the hair in front of her was blocking her vision, the girl gently tucked her long hair behind her ears, revealing her beautiful face and snow-white neck. In that instant, the girl's unique temperament, which was a mixture of innocence and maturity, caused Luoya to widen his eyes and feel a rush of excitement. Luoya, it's me. Do you still recognize me? Lillian's red lips parted slightly as she spoke, causing the black-haired young man's body to tremble slightly. As senior sister? Yes, it's big sister. Don't be afraid. I know your current situation. It's due to the level suppression, right? I think so. I haven't experienced it before, so it's all right, it's all right. I understand. As Lillian said that, she crawled forward a few more steps. She stared at the young man's flushed face, slowly got closer, and then lightly kissed his smooth face. And SP. The instant the kiss landed on the young man's face, Luoya's body trembled violently. However, he resisted the urge to run away. He lowered his gaze and couldn't help but ask Lillian, Senior sister, what are you doing? A morning kiss. It's a very common etiquette, right? I see. Chapter 331. In the bathroom, the slightly cold water splashed on the floor, and the sound of water dripping continued. It was early summer, and although the weather was warm, it wasn't completely hot yet. Most people still thought that it was too early to take a cold shower. However, at this time, in the bathroom, the young man's figure was bathed in water, and his cheeks were still as red as blood. The weather might not be hot, but the high temperature in the room and on the bed wasn't in the scope of the weather. In the face of the arson of the two, even the heavens were powerless against it. They could only lower the temperature physically. Unfortunately, cold water couldn't wash away the memories, let alone cool down the scorching heat in his heart. When the two hugged earlier, due to Luoya's struggle, the towel wrapped around Lillian's body loosened. Although the girl panicked and grabbed the end of the white towel in front of her body, the result was even more impactful in Luoya's eyes. It was an experience where he felt like he saw something, but also like he didn't see it. Only the center part of the body was barely covered by the thin, wet towel, and there was nothing under the towel. Under this indescribable but unusual temptation, the inexperienced young man and woman immediately blushed. Lillian panicked and adjusted the position of the towel back and forth to cover more of her body, but the result was that more and more of her body was exposed. Witnessing such a scene, Luoya didn't dare to stay any longer. He could only grab his clothes and run into the bathroom. Luoya, I am going to take a shower. Leaving such words, the red-faced young man hurriedly fled to the bathroom. Before entering the bathroom, the young man looked back and saw the beautiful back of the girl covered by her black hair. The perfect proportion of her curves under the morning light once again dealt a critical blow to him. Senior sister's body is really beautiful. Soaking in the warm water, Luoya, who thought so, couldn't help but rub his cheeks. Should I say that she's indeed a member of the royal family? Just like the Akut family, which had a 1,000-year-old heritage, under the improvement of generations of handsome men and beautiful women in the Akut family, who had a longer history, Lillian's noble appearance and temperament aside, her body was as fascinating as a work of art. There were no flaws at all. If Luoya was afraid of becoming like this before, then what flashed through his mind just now was joy. If Luoya was still in her original body with full functions and hormones, she definitely wouldn't be able to endure Lillian's intimacy and the agitation of her bloodline. She would probably write a letter and burn paper in one, go to report the completion of the mission to Patriarch Luo. But even if there were no major physical problems, it was inevitable that there would be psychological problems after experiencing such temptation. Luoya didn't know if it was just his imagination, but he felt that Lillian's attitude towards him had changed slightly. It was a feeling that something was added to their past relationship. Although she didn't know what it was, Luo Ya's immediate feeling was that the warmth of the past had turned into an occasional blush and heartbeat. Is it because my body became like this? Chapter 332. Early in the morning at St. Freya Academy, Infant Tea House, famous for its high-quality desserts, two girls sat opposite each other at the tea table. One had long blonde hair, while the other had fiery red hair. Nuwa Iyer, Heidi Crete, and Xiaoluot, Sorophia. The two girls in the academy, Golden Rose and Red Rose, were elegantly drinking their morning tea. Even though they were gathered together early in the morning, they weren't very close to each other. After all, this was a private meeting. If it was an official meeting, the two would stick to their duties and communicate peacefully. But now, it was a place to express their personal feelings. After quarreling over Luo Ya's time allocation for a month, the two naturally didn't treat each other well. On the other hand, the reason why the two girls gathered together today wasn't to improve their relationship, but because a common piece of news was passed to them this morning, and they paid extra attention to it. Luo Ya and that woman went after the cultists. You know about this, right? Of course, I know everything about my dear. How could I miss out on this news? What do you think? It's not a threat. In the face of Nuwa Iyer's question, Xiaoluot replied with an ambiguous answer. The blonde girl was silent for a moment, then nodded slightly in agreement. As Luo Ya's protector and temporary fiancé, both Nuwa Iyer and Xiaoluot were very wary of the boy's arrival at the academy. After all, this place was different from the family. There were too many opportunities and too many people with intentions. Since ancient times, how many betrothed people had their halberds buried in the sand in this academy? How many childhood sweethearts were unable to walk hand in hand after coming here? To some extent, St. Freya Academy was a lover's nightmare, a paradise for vixens. 1 second to remember. It had been nearly 2 months since school started. Although Nuwa Iyer and Xiaoluo were at war from time to time, they were on the same side. Up until now, there were already 3 vixens, but even so, they didn't dare to be careless when dealing with a woman. Lillian Ackman was a terrifying opponent whose status and appearance were not inferior to the two of them. In fact, she was even stronger. She was also the person that the two of them did not want to face the most. Due to the strange queen preference of the Akhat family, the vigilant Nuwa Iyer and Xiaoluot paid special attention to Lillian when they came to the academy. However, with the direct confrontation between the two in public and the appointment of Paul Ackman as the deputy minister, their worries gradually disappeared. The only reason why the two of them were discussing was that Luo Ya and Austin's princess hadn't returned in one night. Normally speaking, one night should be enough to chase after him. He must have encountered some kind of trouble. Then it's even less likely that there's a problem. Moreover, that woman isn't interested in men. That's true. Chapter 333. In the warm bathroom, Luoya was washing his hair diligently with his small hands. He dripped some wet cleaning liquid into his hands, then rubbed it with bubbles and covered his hair. This was originally a simple process, but when his hair suddenly increased, the difficulty suddenly increased. It's so long, so troublesome. The young man thought as he rubbed bubbles on his hair inch by inch. He sighed softly. It had to be said that the side effect of time erosion breath was not only the shrinkage of age, but there were also many other problems. For example, Luo Ya's long hair, which he had never dealt with before, fluttered back and forth, giving the young man an otherworldly aura. However, it was heavy and difficult to wash. It was also easily pressed down when he was lying down. It was much more troublesome than short hair. After much effort, Luo Ya finally finished this difficult first battle. However, when the young man finished wringing his hair, he suddenly remembered an important problem. He did not have a towel. Ah, I forgot. Speaking of which, this seems to be a temporary house. Luo Ya looked around and scratched his head. He could only walk up to the door and knock. After getting Lillian's attention, the young man carefully opened the door a crack. His face was slightly red as he made his request. Senior apprentice sister, do you still have a towel? Sorry, I forgot to give it to you. Use this instead. When Lillian heard Luo Ya's request, she was slightly stunned. Then, she turned around and handed the towel to the door. The young man took it and immediately closed the door. He could not help but heave a sigh of relief. No matter what, the two of them were not real relatives. Although Luo Ya would not find it awkward to hand over a towel at the bathroom door, it was inevitable that he would feel shy. Fortunately, although he had shrunk, Lillian still respected his wishes. She even turned her head away. Well, I guess senior apprentice sister won't bully me when I'm weak. The naive young man hummed a song as he wiped his body. He was unaware of the intense psychological struggle Lillian had gone through last night. After wiping away all the water droplets, the young man looked at his clothes that were stained with blood and mud. After some thought, he sighed. Not only was it dirty, it was also a size too big. He could not wear it at all. The young man blinked helplessly. He could only learn from Lillian and wrap his body with a towel. However, as he moved, a fragrance drifted into Luo Ya's nose. The young man could not help but be slightly stunned. What a familiar smell. I feel like I've smelled it before. Where did it come from? Chapter 334. Luo Ya, how is it now? It's still too loose. In the fitting room, the black-haired young man held his small head with one hand as if he was having a headache. His other hand was holding a pair of pants that were much too big for him. His face was filled with worry and helplessness. After Lillian found the maid's clothes, Luo Ya, whose clothes had been through many trials and tribulations, naturally started rummaging through the cabinets. Then, of course, he found several servants' clothes. But unfortunately, unlike Lillian's cute and fitting clothes, normal adult male clothes were far too big for Luo Ya's current body. Senior sister, do you have any smaller ones? Unfortunately, that's already the smallest one. It seems that I'll have to cut it a little. The black-haired girl looked at the young man who walked out of the fitting room. She smiled as she took the clothes that Luo Ya handed to her. Then, she released some spell power from her fingers to cut off the overly long parts. Just bear with it for now. You'll be able to buy suitable clothes when you reach the next city. Yep, that's nothing. The young man who was sitting on the chair and watching Lillian do her homework swung his legs. He stared at the girl's serious face. After thinking for a while, he couldn't help but ask the question that had been bothering him ever since he learned of Lillian's plan. Senior sister, are we really leaving? It was a short question with a weak voice. But the girl stopped what she was doing when she heard Luo Ya's question. Lillian looked at the clothes in her hands for a moment, then nodded resolutely. Yep, we have to leave. I see. Luo Ya didn't refute the girl's resolute words, but he lowered his head slightly with a hint of disappointment. Having just experienced the danger of a fragment of history, he naturally wanted to see the people close to him as soon as possible. It was only natural that he wouldn't be happy about having to be separated all of a sudden. Lillian understood this, but understanding was one thing. The girl didn't feel anything. After all, the people she cared about the most were right in front of her. Lillian glanced at the young man who was kicking his feet worriedly. She hesitated for a moment and sighed. She slowly retracted the spell power in her hands. The girl walked up to Luo Ya and gently lifted his chin. Their eyes met as she tried to persuade him. Chapter 335. The Austin Empire was a country where conservatism prevailed, whether it was the citizens or the nobles, whether it was in their ideology or in their daily lives. The ancient glory of the Austin Empire that no longer existed was something that the citizens of the Austin Empire yearned for, which was why they viewed the ancients as beautiful in all sorts of ideologies. One of the most representative examples was the extravagant ball gowns worn by the noblewomen of the Austin Empire. Even though the simplified dance steps could no longer allow them to dance in full bloom, these gowns still occupied the high ground of mainstream formal wear for hundreds of years. As for men and women, that was even more so. Luo Ya, who was well-versed in history and folklore, clearly remembered what it meant to share a bed with someone of the opposite sex in the Austin Empire. That was basically a secret promise, and it meant that she would not marry anyone other than him. Last night, we slept together. The girl's words entered his ears, and her hot breath that made him itch hit his ears. Looking at the beautiful face that was so close to him, Luoya almost instantly covered his ears, and his face flushed red. Together? Why? Was it because of my situation at the time? Or? Such a question appeared in the young man's mind, and after his ears, Luoya's heart also began to itch uncontrollably due to certain feelings. It was a feeling that the young man was desperately suppressing in the depths of his heart, mixed with excitement and anticipation. It was because the relationship between the two of them was so contradictory, but it was also abnormally tempting. Just thinking about it made his heart beat faster and his brain heat up. Even his breathing became unstable, but the question in his heart was getting harder and harder to ignore. Does senior sister want to have that kind of relationship with me? Reaching out his hand to touch his chest that was hiding something burning, the young man blinked his moist eyes and could not help but look up at the black-haired girl. Senior sister, was it because my situation last night was very bad? That's indeed the reason. Facing Luoya's question, Lillian slightly averted her gaze and reached out to pull up the hair by her ear, and her blushing cheeks and neck were especially charming. Chapter 336. Under the light of the rising sun, different people were living different lives. For example, some were drinking tea, some were whispering sweet nothings, and some were hurrying on their way. The golden sunlight swept away the silver moon. In the forest under the morning sun, a team of mercenaries under the lead of a silver-haired girl riding a monster rushed out of the mountains in the north of Akkad territory and ran to the territory of Saint Maester Theocracy. Looking at the disappearing moonlight in the sky, AI Lizzie, who felt a part of her power falling into a deep slumber, sighed slightly and looked back at Cynthia and the others. No one is left behind, right? Yes, Mississippi, the woman in armor lowered her head slightly and answered. But before she could finish her sentence, a vomiting sound came from behind. AI Lizzie heard the sound and looked back. Behind Cynthia, a middle-aged man patted the back of an old man in a gray robe and smiled helplessly. I'm sorry, Mississippi. This old man is old. He can't stand the bumpy ride. Don't listen to him. I'm fine, Mississippi. I just ate too much for dinner. Really? The old village chief of the Church of Strength, Wood, waved his hand with a calm face. Rodney, who was beside him, didn't say anything. AI Lizzie looked at the old man and then looked at the pagan soldiers who were in a bad mood from the bumpy ride of the monsters. After thinking for a moment, she sighed and gave another order. Forget it. Let's take a rest, AI Lizzie said as she jumped off the back of the wolf-shaped monster. She stroked the head of the monster and injected some life force into it. The tall monster wolf immediately let out a comfortable howl and wagged its tail like a husky. Such a magical scene made Cynthia and the others who recently learned about the girl's ability couldn't help but admire her. And that's right. These monsters that were terrifying to outsiders were the wolves that other territories had to invest a lot of manpower to eliminate every year. Under the command of Miss AI Lizzie of Akkad territory, they had become a special means of movement in the territory. Once there was an emergency, the soldiers could ride these monsters under the leadership of AI Lizzie and could even shorten the distance by 10 times. For example, now, after crossing 3 mountains in one night, AI Lizzie and the others had reached the border of the theocracy, which would normally take 10 days to reach. If it was during wartime, this speed would be considered divine soldiers descending from the sky. But now, the girl who accomplished this feat didn't have any joy. Instead, she took out the life orb and carefully observed it. As expected, it's still like this. After a night of traveling and thinking, AI Lizzie had calmed down a little. After noticing that the life orb's radiance didn't change, the girl already had some guesses in her heart. The place Luoya went to wasn't some hellish battlefield, but a peaceful academy. As a great noble of the theocracy, He must be one of the important figures in the academy. Considering the strength of the young man, the possibility of Luoya dying in a battle in such a place was very small. Then, there was only one possibility. The historical fragment, which was the danger brought by Luoya's bloodline. Now that the life orb was stable, it was very likely that it didn't mean that Luoya was dying. Instead, it was the same situation as the previous few times. Chapter 337. What were the sacred grounds of Shiya's love? Every country had their own answers to this question. For example, in the Austin Empire, most of the nobles in the south would choose the ruined forest. The legend of Charles II's luminous butterflies had been widely spread in the Austin Empire for hundreds of years. Every February, the Milton family would hold a grand aristocratic banquet there. In the north, the people near the capital were more inclined to go to the northern territory of the Austin Empire, the Ubwell Duchy. Ubwell was one of the earliest vassal states of the Austin Empire. It was located in the frozen lands of the north, and its land area was not small. It bordered the kingdom of Knights of Pindar, but its location was very remote. It was an awkward place where agriculture and animal husbandry were not easy to develop. It was so useless that the Austin Empire did not annex it. However, after many years of moving to the west, the living standards of the people improved, and a side business of Ubwell rose. As a country in the north, Ubwell had a specialty, and that was the aurora that appeared every summer. It was a tourist attraction, and it was a natural sight that most Shiya's people in the big cities liked. In ancient times, the aurora was considered to be Shiya's appreciation and recognition. It appeared in many legends and stories, and was generally regarded as a beautiful and blessed light. In the Austin Empire, a special group of people gave it a special meaning. It was said that couples who watched the aurora together would be recognized and blessed by Shiya. Yes, it was such a rumor. However, as the saying went, when a lie is told too many times, it will become the truth. This saying had been circulating in the north of the Austin Empire for hundreds of years, and now it had a little bit of an ancient flavor. More and more people believed in this saying, and Ubwell in the north became more and more prosperous. Today, the country had become the honeymoon territory of the rich merchants and nobles of the Austin Empire and the kingdom of Knights of Pindar. After the snow closed the mountains for half a year, countless newlyweds and unmarried couples would welcome in May. There was an endless stream of luxury cars on the official road, and there were also many stories of famous historical figures. For example, when the Austin Empire's Emperor Guman II visited Aberville, he originally wanted to use the name of a visit to inspect and prepare to expand and conquer this land into the Empire's territory. But when he was watching the aurora, he accidentally met Princess Aberville. The two fell in love at first sight and soon fell in love. Because of this, Guman II believed that Aberville was the blessed land of Shiya, and the invasion war was thus aborted. In the end, Princess Aberville married into the Austin Empire, and the combination of the two sides avoided a calamity. Such stories were quite popular among the people, and were even published in books. However, in the eyes of Luoya, these stories were not credible at all. At the end of the day, the fate of a small country like Ubwell was not in its own hands. The biggest reason it could survive beside the Austin Empire until now was because it was the buffer zone between the north of the Austin Empire and the Knights' country of Pindar. As for love at first sight, if the Austin Empire wanted to marry him, wouldn't the Aberville princess marry him? Would she dare to? If it were in the past, Luoya would have been sarcastic towards the Austin Empire's propaganda, but ever since he met Lillian, senior sister said that? Then it's fine. Looking at Lillian's longing expression when she told the love story, Luoya almost subconsciously gave up on refuting. As for the place that senior sister chose, Luoya also felt that it was more suitable. The journey wasn't too far, and as a city that focused on developing tourism, Aberville did indeed have enough human traffic. The endless stream of tourists would allow the two of them to fish in troubled waters, and the possible encirclement caused by prophecy spells would be broken. Chapter 338. In Luo Ya's previous life, an admirable army once had a saying, "No guns, no cannons, the enemy will make them for us." Luo Ya was deeply moved by the fearless and optimistic slogan in his previous life. Now, Luo Ya also absorbed the essence of it, but it was a different situation. No cars, no horses, the system will make them for us. Sitting on a log for a temporary rest, Luo Ya looked at the patrolling Lionheart soldiers and set such a goal in his heart. To be honest, as a host, Luo Ya felt that he could be considered gentle and calm. Ever since he was young, he had never complained about the French-Italian hybrid system that did nothing most of the time and only worked in times of crisis. However, this time was different. This time, you didn't even detect the side effects. "What use do I have for you?" In front of an empty bonfire, Luo Ya roared at the system. As if sensing the unprecedented anger of the host, the system actually went silent for a moment before replying. This system is a passive system. When special factors such as time and space are encountered, there will be a delay in the data analysis function. Hope the host can understand. Understand? Understand your head. If I forgive you, how can I extort you? Luo Ya made up his mind to take advantage of the system. The anger on his face naturally increased. At this moment, he spoke righteously, like a player who encountered an exploding server or an auntie who haggled in the market downstairs. He stared at the system looking for profit. You want me to lose my memory? Sure, but you have to be sincere, right?" The black-haired young man curled up the corner of his mouth. Staring at the 50% off on the 400 Years of History limited event, he calmly stated his request. "It's too expensive. I can't accept this discount. Either give me a discount or give me compensation. You choose." In the face of Roja's aggressive request, the system once again fell into silence and gave a reply after a long time. "Everything has a source. Favorability cannot be generated out of thin air. The gold coins absorbed have been allocated to the existing underground mine. The system is unable to compensate. But considering the unusual situation that the host has experienced, the system will start a new event." Chapter 339. 3 days later, in St. Freya Academy, under the lush green tree, two young ladies were holding two letters that were clearly written by the same person. Their faces were pale, and their bodies were trembling. "Dear Nuwa Iyer, we sincerely respect you and uphold the principle of peaceful coexistence to inform you that Mr. Luoya, Akat, has decided to marry the Austin Empire's queen, Lillian Ackman. The latter is pregnant." On the other side of the tea table, the blonde young lady read the anonymous letter that was sent to her this morning in an ice-cold tone. Her voice was trembling, especially when she read the words pregnant. The strong spell fluctuations shrouded Nuwa Iyer in a layer of light. Without a doubt, this letter written by an unknown person with the intention of persuading Nuwa Iyer to give up on their relationship with Luo Ya had completely infuriated Miss Angel. But one had to admit that even though the young lady's behavior was out of anger, there was also some worry and fear in it. Even though Nuwa Iyer felt that it was a lie, the entire letter was conclusive. Luo Ya and Lillian hadn't returned for 3 days, and everything seemed to be in line with the situation described in the letter. After comparing it with reality, Miss Angel finally couldn't hide her wavering heart. In the past 3 days, Nuwa Iyer and Xia Luo naturally sensed that something was amiss. But according to their mentor, Chris, she had received a handwritten letter from Lillian. Their mission to hunt down the cultists was a success, and they weren't back yet. They were just on the way to complete another off-campus mission. Miss Angel was naturally suspicious of this statement, but she didn't have any clues until this letter appeared before them. Then, they realized that something might have happened. Luoya and Lillian eloped? Nua Iyer wouldn't believe it no matter what. The reason was simple. As the childhood sweetheart who grew up with Luoya, Nua Iyer knew him too well. He definitely wasn't the kind of person who would abandon everything for personal love. Another more important reason that Nua Iyer didn't want to admit was that Ai Lizzie was still in the Akkad family. As a late-stage Sisgon, would he abandon his beloved sister for a woman whom he had only known for less than 2 months? How was that possible? If that was the case, Nua Iyer would have won over the years. Moreover, Luoya was the only son in the family, and he had a close relationship with his father on the front line. If Lillian was pregnant, the Akkad family, who had few members, would support them no matter what. Why would they elope? Heh, do you think that I'll be swayed by such rumors? You underestimate me too much, Lillian Archimedes. We have to act now. Xiaoluot, I need your... Xiaoluot? Nua Iyer stood up and looked at the young lady opposite her. She wanted to suggest a help, but she didn't expect the red-haired young lady to be stunned. Xiaoluot's face was as pale as paper, and her body was trembling slightly. However, unlike Nua Iyer's anger, Xiaoluot's trembling was due to fear, or perhaps a psychological shadow. It was a psychological shadow brought by the Sorofia family's source substance. Most female marriages were unfortunate. The loyalty, source substance of the Sorofia family allowed their females to be loyal to their partners. However, because of this, if they couldn't obtain the love of their loved ones, they would suffer double the pain. Her aunts had all kinds of tragic experiences that they couldn't tell outsiders. Ever since she was young, Xiaoluot had a fear of forming a family. It was only after meeting Luoya that things changed. Among all the girls that Luoya met, Xiaoluot seemed to be optimistic and passionate, but she was actually the most insecure when it came to love. This kind of letter that was similar to breaking off the relationship made Xiaoluot think of many situations where the females in her family were abandoned. Although her rationality told her that Luoya wouldn't do this, she couldn't help but think of things in a bad direction. Xiaoluot, why are you still looking at this thing? It's obviously fake. Nua Iyer couldn't help but frown when she saw the young lady staring at the letter with red eyes. However, Xiaoluot couldn't help but make a guess. Chapter 340. On the official road leading to Aberville, the country of the north, a simple and elegant black carriage was moving forward. Inside the carriage, a black-haired young man was rolling on the bed. At that moment, Luoya's brows were tightly knitted. His eyes were closed, and it was obvious that he was in a dream. However, the young man's petite body kept moving around on the bed. His facial expression showed that he was in pain, and he was making some muffled sounds. No matter how one looked at it, he didn't look like he was sleeping normally. Perhaps she heard the sounds in the room, or perhaps she sensed the young man's emotional instability through the bloodline connection. The black door suddenly opened. Lillian walked in from the living room and saw the young man's appearance. She immediately woke him up. Luoya, Luoya, are you all right? Senior sister. Ah, did I have a nightmare again? Hearing the young lady's call, Luoya woke up from his sleep. He rubbed his forehead as if he had a headache. Then, he waved his hand to Lillian's worried gaze. It's fine, senior sister. It's just a nightmare. Although it's just a nightmare, you've been having nightmares for a few days, right? Are you really all right? It's fine. I'm just a little tired. I'll be fine when we reach the city. I see. Facing Roja's words, the black-haired girl had nothing to say, but she was still worried. She leaned down and gently hugged Roja's body, patting his back to calm his emotions. Seeing this, Roja stretched out his hand and hugged her back, but when he buried his face in Lillian's arms, his eyes gradually became dignified. 1 second to remember. It had been more than half a month since Luoya and Lillian left Leinster. During this time, the two could be said to have traveled rapidly. Now, they had passed through 3 towns and were about to reach the capital of the Aberville Duchy, Aurora City, Ors. At the beginning of this journey, Luoya took advantage of the time when Lillian was hunting to exchange favorability points. When the young lady returned with the archer, she was shocked when she saw a carriage appear out of thin air. However, after learning that Luoya obtained it through some means, she didn't pursue the matter. There were all kinds of strange things in this world. For example, some humans who were naturally close to trees might receive a gift from a certain forest and receive guidance to obtain a lost treasure. Such situations were recorded in history. Lillian didn't know if it was the same for Luoya, but she wouldn't suspect it either. No matter how good their relationship was, they couldn't have no secrets at all. Leaving some personal space for others was a form of etiquette and a form of respect. In the face of Lillian's behavior, Luoya heaved a huge sigh of relief and told her about the dangers of this journey and the situation of the Saint Heroes Society. Lillian recalled the history fragments where she had seen the organization with her own eyes. She nodded with a serious expression and discussed countermeasures with Luoya. In the end, they still decided to act according to the original plan. As a tourist destination, the northern region didn't have a fixed population. Cults couldn't develop there, and there were almost no local forces. Besides, the flow of people there was difficult to target. Therefore, even in the face of cults, the closer northern region was still the best choice. Therefore, after having a meal of wild game, Luoya summoned the horses contributed by the cavalrymen to pull the sinful spirit carriage, and personally put on the illusory tear earring for Lillian. They embarked on the journey again. But this time, it was much more comfortable. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.